Let's look at this question. What are the problems in measuring inequality? This may be useful for those as an answer writing practice who are preparing for UPSC Economics Optional or Indian Economic Services. Pause the video, try to do it yourself first. What are the problems in measuring inequality? Well, we have the data on income distribution. We have the data on the poverty rates. But what people are interested is not in their incomes. They're interested in the incomes which can maintain their living standards. They're interested in the maintenance of the living standards. And the problem in measuring inequality is coming only from this fact that we don't have the data which can measure the living standards properly. We have the data on incomes, definitely. But there are problems in measuring inequality which is going to come because of the data. So let's look at that. The first issue is of the in-kind transfers. So because of government schemes, state programs, many poor families, they also get some kind of an in-kind transfer in the form of the support by government, support by state. But the data on income distribution and the poverty rates is not taking into account the data on these in-kind transfers. They're just taking into account the data on money incomes. So since the data on in-kind transfers is not taken up, the proper measure of inequality is not being shown. So that is the point. You are not taking into account what could have reduced the inequality. So that is one problem. This is the first problem in measuring inequality. The other reason could be the economic life cycle. What do we mean by this? When we are young, when we are just entering the labor force, our incomes are low. When we reach middle age, our incomes tend to peak. When we retire, again, our incomes are low. But do you think that when we are retiring, our standard of living is going to fall? No, because we would have saved a lot of income when our incomes were at their peak, right? So our incomes are following a certain life cycle pattern, and people generally have a tendency to smoothen out their incomes, to smoothen out their consumption. So their standard of living doesn't vary much. So even during retirement or at the time of the retirement, although you won't be earning much of the annual income, but your standard of living is not going to be very different. But the data on annual incomes, if you're going to take that, that is going to give you a wrong inequality measure. What we are interested more in is the standard of living, right? Not in the incomes or the annual incomes which you are getting. So when you talk about inequality, we are actually talking about inequality from the point of view of standard of living, not exactly in terms of an income. So all of these examples or the reasons of or the problems in measuring inequality is they're data driven. So we may have the data on income, but how do you define standard of living? That is important, right? Let's write that. The other problem which is related to the measurement of inequality is the difference between the permanent and the transitory income. So standard of living is more or less related to the permanent income. There can be changes in the transitory income. So maybe due to some good thing happening in the economy, your income has increased, or something has happened which is outside your control, your income on in that particular year, your income has fallen. But over the time, your standard of living, it remains same. So we have the data on the annual incomes, but data to gauge permanent income is difficult, right? So we are more interested in the permanent income, which is a better measure of standard of living rather than the temporary changes in the income. So let us write that. So this is what I've written. That is your permanent versus temporary income, transitory income. So to measure inequality, it is basically the distribution of permanent income is required, not the distribution of the annual income. So all of these problems, they are stemming from the data, problem in data. So we have the data on annual income. We may not have the data on the permanent income. We may not have the data on the life cycle income. We may not have the data on in-kind transfers. So because we don't have these data, so the measure of inequality or the poverty rate which we get, that may not be accurate. uh, in Supposedly, in case if we have these data, then we would have a better measure of inequality or poverty rate, right? Chaliye. Thank you, beta.